Hello, Pokebros. Welcome to episode 8 of my rewrite of Ash's Kanto journey. Last time our trio made it to Cinnabar for Ash's 7th gym battle. After figuring out the riddle, Ash would challenge the gym, but would lose. In the process, his disobedient Charmeleon would become severely injured. After seeing how much Ash cared, Charmeleon would begin to listen again, and they would win the rematch, with Charmeleon evolving, and that's where we pick up today. Our story would open with Ash leaving the Cinnabar gym. He would remember that Brock and Green told him that they were retrieving their fossils from the restoration lab. Ash would then head there to meet up with them. After arriving, Ash would see Brock with his new Ammonite and Green with her new Kabuto. Ash would think the prehistoric Pokemon are really cool. Our trio would then leave the lab. Ash would ask Brock where his next gym battle is, and Brock would reveal that it is in Viridian City. Ash would be surprised, since that was the first city he visited on his journey. Brock would then suggest that the trio stop by Pallet on the way to Viridian. Ash and Green would both like the idea. Our trio would then hop on a ferry leading to Pallet. After a short ferry ride, our trio would arrive in Pallet. Our trio would then make their way to Professor Oak's lab. After arriving, Professor Oak would greet the trio. Our group would then get to talking. Oak would bring up the fact that Green had caught 144 Pokemon. Ash and Brock would be shocked by this. Professor Oak would then reveal that besides the Dragonite line, the only Pokemon she didn't have were Gengar and Golem. Since Ash had a Haunter and Brock had a Graveler, they would ask Green if she wanted to do a trade and trade back, so she could finish up her Pokedex. Green would then agree. First, Ash would trade Green Haunter. She would let him out of his ball, then he would begin to glow, evolving into Gengar. Then they would trade back. Next, Brock would trade Green his Graveler, and things would go the same with her letting out of the Pokeball and him evolving into Golem. They would then trade back. Green would be super excited, since now she only needed to capture Dragonite to finish her Pokedex. Just at this moment, Gary would come barging in. Professor Oak would greet his grandson, who was gloating about having just won his 8th badge. Ash would then challenge Gary to a battle, saying, "I don't care how many badges you have, I'll still beat you." Gary would say, "Whatever, my Pokemon could always use some sparring practice." The two young trainers would then head to the backfield. Professor Oak would declare that their battle should be a 3-on-3. Ash would then throw out Dratini to start the battle. Gary would send in Nidoking. Ash would then call for a slam, but Nidoking would dodge, then striking with a Mega Punch. Dratini would be knocked to the ground. Gary would then call for an Ice Beam, landing and doing serious damage. Ash would then call for an Outrage from Dratini, and she would do so, charging in and landing the attack. Nidoking would be unfazed though, then striking with a Horn Drill. Dratini would fall to the ground again, and Gary would call for another Ice Beam, this time taking Dratini out. Ash, knowing Nidoking is a ground type, would send in Tangela. Ash would start by calling for a Vine Whip. The attack would land but wouldn't do much damage. Gary would then call for another Ice Beam, but Tangela would barely be able to dodge. Ash would then call for a Bind, tying Nidoking up. While Nidoking was trapped, Ash would call for a Solar Beam. Tangela would start charging up the attack and it would land, doing big damage. Nidoking would then charge him with a Mega Punch. Tangela would dodge though, then striking with a Vine Whip, taking Nidoking out. Next out for Gary would be Pidgeot. Ash would call for a Sleep Powder, but Pidgeot would dodge, then striking with a Wing Attack. Tangela would get knocked back, taking big damage. Gary would call for a follow-up Wing Attack, but Tangela would barely be able to dodge. Ash would then call for a Bind, but while trying to get close, Tangela would be hit again with another Wing Attack, taking him out. Now with his back up against the wall, Ash would send in his partner, Pikachu. Ash would start by calling for a Thunderbolt. Gary would order Pidgeot to dodge, but she wouldn't have the speed, being struck head-on. Now stunned, Ash would order Pikachu to strike Pidgeot with a Quick Attack. Pikachu would charge in, then knocking Pidgeot back. Gary would then order an Aerial Ace. Ash would order Pikachu to dodge, but it wouldn't be possible. Pikachu would get knocked back. Ash would then order a Thunderbolt, but Gary would order a Double Team, confusing Pikachu. Ash would then tell Pikachu to fire off multiple Thunderbolts, hitting all the illusions, including the real Pidgeot, taking her out. Last out for Gary would be Machamp. Gary would start by calling for a Cross Chop. Pikachu would dodge, then striking with a Thunderbolt. The attack would land, but Machamp would be unfazed. Gary would then call for an Earthquake, causing the ground to shake. Pikachu would try to dodge, but wouldn't be able to, taking super effective damage. Ash would then call for another Thunderbolt. The attack would land, but Machamp again would be unfazed, then striking with a Cross Chop, taking Pikachu out. Gary would then say, "Wow, Ashy boy, it feels like it gets easier and easier every time we battle. Smell you later." Gary would then leave, going to train for the Pokemon League. Ash would be very upset. Green and Brock would try to cheer him up. Our trio would then thank Professor Oak by saying goodbye as they would set off for Viridian. After a short trip along Route 1, our trio would arrive in Viridian City. Ash would enter the gym, but unlike most gym battles, the gym leader wouldn't greet Ash. He would just declare the battle will be a 3-on-3. Giovanni, the gym leader, would then throw out his first Pokemon, Rhydon. Seeing this, Ash would send in Poliwhirl. Ash would call for an Ice Punch, but Rhydon would dodge, then striking with a Stomp. Poliwhirl would get knocked to the ground. Giovanni would then order a Thunderbolt. The attack would land, severely weakening Poliwhirl. Ash would then call for a Hydro Pump. The attack would land, taking Rhydon out. Giovanni would then send in Nidoqueen. Giovanni would call for a superpower, and the attack would land, knocking Poliwhirl back. While he was down, Giovanni would call for a Thunderbolt, this time taking Poliwhirl out. Ash would then send in Gengar. Giovanni would call for a Poison Sting, but Gengar would dodge, then strike him with a Shadow Ball. The attack would land, knocking Nidoqueen back. Giovanni would then call for an Earthquake. However, Gengar would dodge by jumping into the sky. Giovanni would then follow up with his own Shadow Ball. This attack would land, knocking Gengar to the ground. Then Giovanni would order an Earthquake, this time landing and doing big damage. Ash would then order Gengar to use Shadow Punch. Gengar would charge in, striking and taking Nidoqueen out. Last out for Giovanni would be Persian. Seeing Gengar weakened, Ash would swap him out for Charizard. Giovanni would start by calling for a Slash. Charizard would dodge, then striking with a Wing Attack. Persian would get knocked back, then striking with a Thunder. Charizard would fall to the ground, weakened. Persian would then charge in, going for a Slash. The attack would land, severely weakening Charizard. Ash would order Charizard to use a Flamethrower. The attack would land, burning Persian. Charizard would then follow up with a Seismic Toss. Persian would get thrown into the ground, landing fainted. Giovanni would return Persian to her Pokeball, then throwing Ash his gym badge without saying a word. Our trio would then leave the gym, and Ash would start celebrating since he now qualifies for the Pokemon League. However, Brock would then deflate Ash's mood by telling him that the league wasn't for 2 more weeks. Ash would be upset until Brock tells him that means they have 2 weeks to train. This would excite Ash because he loves to see his Pokemon get stronger. We would then cut to Ash back behind Professor Oak Labs. Ash would be working with all his Pokemon. Brock would be helping Ash with his training. Brock would be helping most of Ash's Pokemon while Ash was working with Poliwhirl, trying to teach him Brick Break. Professor Oak would then come out to watch Ash's training. After seeing Ash working with Poliwhirl, he would head over to see if he could help. Professor Oak would give Poliwhirl a few tips on how to perform Brick Break. After putting the tips to use, Poliwhirl would perform the move a lot better. Ash would be surprised, then asking Professor Oak, "Hey, Professor Oak, were you ever a Pokemon trainer?" Professor Oak would chuckle, then saying, "Yes, back in my younger days I was quite the trainer. I even helped train Champion Lance." Ash would be shocked, saying, "Wait, you trained the Champion?" Professor Oak would laugh again, then saying, "Yes." Professor Oak would then offer Ash a Water Stone so he could evolve his Poliwhirl. Ash would accept the Water Stone. Ash would then ask Poliwhirl if he was ready to evolve. Poliwhirl would nod his head. Ash would hand him the stone, and he would then begin to glow, evolving into a Poliwrath. The next day, Ash would head back out to do some training, but he would be shocked seeing that Richie was outside. Ash would ask Richie what he was doing here, and Richie would tell Ash that he too recently qualified for the Pokemon League. Richie would then ask Ash for a quick one-on-one battle to test his strength before the league. Ash would accept. Richie would send out Hitmonchan while Ash would send in Fearow. Richie would start by calling for a Thunder Punch, but Ash would order Fearow to dodge. Ash would then order a Drill Peck. Fearow would charge in with the attack, but Hitmonchan would dodge, then landing a Thunder Punch. Fearow would be hurt bad, so Ash would decide to keep his distance. He would then order a Razor Wind. The attack would land, but wouldn't do much damage. Richie would then order Hitmonchan to use Rock Slide. The attack would land, severely weakening Fearow. Ash would then order another Drill Peck. Ash would order a Thunder Punch, but Fearow would weave the punch, then landing the Drill Peck, taking Hitmonchan out. Ash would then thank Richie for the great battle, and he would then promise that he'll beat him in the league. The 2 trainers would then part ways. About a week later, Ash, Brock, and Green would set off for the Pokemon League. That's all for today, Pokebros. I hope you enjoyed. In this episode, Ash's Poliwhirl evolved into Poliwrath, and he won his 8th gym badge. However, he did lose another fight to Gary. Also, guys, I was wondering, for the Pokemon League, should I do one episode or two? Because I have an idea of what I want to happen, and I'm just wondering if you guys would rather see one big league episode or 2 episodes each with about 3 battles in them. That's all I have for now, but don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye, Pokebros.